Hello, I am City Council Member Sean Downing. I have the privilege of being the chair for the River Falls Bee City Committee here in River Falls. We have a special presentation tonight on native plants and more for pollinators. I am introduce our speaker and member of our bee committee, our expert, Melanie Waldon. She is the owner of Lazy Goat Studio. Uh, they're a local family apiary and they're fully sustainable. And we're really excited to do this presentation. This is the first one of hopefully many. We're going to be doing more in the future. So thank you for all coming tonight. And with that, please help us welcome Melanie Waldon.
Hi, folks. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah? Okay. I'm Melanie. We own a small apiary called Lazy Goat Studio. You may have heard of us. You might have seen us. You might not have. We're just north of River Falls on the Kinney River. Um, my background is I'm a landscape architect by education. I'm a passionate about bees and goats and sustainability and energy and all the things that are wild. I started beekeeping in earnest about 15 years ago, roughly. Did a little bit right out of college, the grunt work, the cleanup work, um, and learned a lot about bees, which in turn teaches us a lot about our environment, which in turn teaches us a lot about pollinators. And so I'm just wondering who all tonight, who knows what a pollinator is? Do you all know what a pollinator is? I figured you did. But anyhow, I put a definition up there. So the group of pollinators is a lot larger than we think, because I think a lot of times we just think it's bees, honeybees or native bees, but it incorporates really anything that transfers pollen from flower to flower. And uh, that's how we have seeds. That's how we have flowers. That's how we have native plants. That's how our annuals are pollinated, our trees or shrubs are pollinated. That's where our fruit comes from. So anyhow, it's pollinators are extremely important. So they do include bees and wasps, ants, flies, beetles, even those nasty little beetles we all hate that are chewing on our roses right now, and birds and bats. And bats we don't think of because we don't see them at night too much, but they're actually a pretty active pollinator, especially in the southern climates. Um, so anyhow, let's see if I can do this. So pollinators, we just talked about the fact that they're important, but I'm not sure that everyone understands how important they are. So somewhere between 75 and 95% of all flowering plants need pollinators, meaning they're not self pollinated or that they don't go on the wind, naturally. They need something to move their pollen from one place to another. They need it. That's how it works. One out of every 3 bites of food you eat is because of pollinators. And you think about us in the US, I could wax on about this, but we're providing food for many countries of the world, aren't we? And we're doing it in large means, very large means. And those large means usually honeybees, because the natives can't do it on their own with these huge populations. It takes something like a honeybee to do that. Um, One of the things that as I was doing this research and I kind of thought I knew everything, it's always good to force yourself to do this because you think, oh, wow, I didn't know that. So the point is, one of the issues that we have right now is a lack of pollinators. Our pollinators are really, we're losing them. We're also concerned about the quality of our food. So if you notice up there in the last paragraph, when something is pollinated by pollinators, the quality of that nutrition goes way up. So I think that's something that we don't think about very often when we think about the fact that the food we have today is not nearly as nutritious as it might have been 50 or 100 years ago. I'm going to wax on honeybees a little bit because they're my favorite, right? So honeybees are just pollinators deluxe. That's what they do. So we would not be able to grow the large commercial crops in the US without honeybees. We could not do it. There would not be enough pollinators to make it happen. And you may have heard, we're a small apiary. We winter our honeybees right here in Wisconsin. But the large beekeepers, those beekeepers with 2,000, 3,000, 10,000, and more honeybee hives usually ship those bees to the West Coast to pollinate almonds. How many of you have heard about that? Yeah. There are pros and cons to it, but it helps keep the beekeepers going. It's an income source. And they would not be able to raise the almonds without the pollinators. Um, Anyhow, the bees are super industrious, probably the most industrious little critter on earth. Butterflies are pollinators, so you all probably know that already. I think we follow the monarchs, don't we, and worry about them, and we should. Butterflies have those long legs, and they're not considered the best pollinator out there, but they do reach the parts of the plants that a lot of other pollinators can't. So they're maybe not the most effective pollinator, but they're still needed. They can get into those little crevices with their long tongues and their long legs that a lot of other pollinators can't do. They have good vision, but a very weak sense of smell. Butterflies can see red, and that's why you're going to see them drawn to those pinks and those reds. So if you're wanting a butterfly garden, think about the colors, right? The colors are extremely important. Um, they prefer the brightly colored red, yellow, and orange flowers. And the other thing is, those flowers need to be open during the day. So a moonflower, which is one of my favorite, but it opens in the evening, you're going to find moths on it, which are fine, but you're not going to find butterflies. So you kind of, find your favorite flowers and watch what comes to it. And that will tell you, what type of pollinators are using those flowers. Um, the other thing that we'll talk about for all pollinators, and here I think it kind of shows you that's a cone flower up there. Those are cone flowers that the butterfly is on. Do you see how and I don't want to say that you have to only plant natives because I don't believe that. I think a mix is the best thing that you can do, a mix of natives and a mix of other flowers. This is a coneflower, whether it's a native or not, to be honest, it probably is not. But what you want to do is look at the structure of the flower. So look at how the petals are wide open. So what that does is that allows the pollinators to hop on those petals and go for the nectar. So what you want to be careful of is a lot of hybridized flowers have been hybridized for their looks where they have double heads, double flowers, you know what I'm talking about, where they're so floriferous, the pollinators can't actually get to the nectar. Sometimes the nectar is bred out of the flowers. And one example of that would be your sunflower. Now, we live right around the corner from Leeson's family farm, who does this huge pumpkin festival in the fall. And our honeybees pollinate, they just fly right over there, all of their pumpkins. But what pumpkins actually don't have a lot of nectar. So, I've been kind of complaining about that. So, what they do is they plant these varieties of sunflowers and they have to specifically look for the ones that have nectar. Most sunflowers today have been hybridized to have absolutely no nectar. So you want to ask questions, do your homework. You can find anything online anymore, right? But if you're going to plant them, look for the information on the seeds if you're going to plant those. So we'll go on. Hummingbirds are a great pollinator. We love them when they come and talk to us in the window. Probably their favorite flower at our place is Monardia or bee balm. Bee balm has been hybridized again. There is a native bee balm, which is great, but the hybridized varieties are great too. Again, what you want to do is look for the open petals. Try and stay away from the hybridized varieties that have been bred to be double or triple, where they're really, really so full, like a full pom-pom. Well, the pollinators can't get into them and can't get the nectar. So look for something more open. Here it's actually on the lantana, which for us is an annual. Down south, You see tons of them, right? They grow all year long, but for us, they're an annual, but they love them. They love the bright color and they love the nectar. Um, Hummingbirds, I think, are really interesting. They go for flowers that have deep throats, and they have that long beak so they can get into the deep throats. And actually, if you look carefully at a lantana, it has a deep, kind of a deep well that they go into. Um, so that's kind of what you want to look for. I notice ours are very active in the morning. They're also pretty active, kind of mid to late afternoon. Again, they like those colors, the red, the pink, the yellows are attracted to them. I don't really see them going for blues. I see our honeybees love blues and magentas, and so do moths. Have you ever noticed when you have a deep purple blooming flower how the moths are just attracted to it? Hummingbirds could care less. They really don't care. But when they find a bee balm plant, those little guys are really territorial and they'll fight for everything to keep somebody else off from it, but it's fun to watch them. So, bee balm is a favorite plant of mine. And don't feel that you have to just use a native. But I would, we'll talk about this later a little bit, but I would suggest that whatever you buy, whatever plants you decide to use multiples. Always use multiples. I think that's a mistake that many people don't do. We'll go on. Beetles as pollinators. Here's a sunflower with those little suckers. They're not always bad, um, but they do ruin the flowers. They like to eat those petals and those strong stems. They like the large open flowers that are typically open during the day, heavily scented. They do a number on my roses. I don't know about anybody else. Late, usually for us, it's later in the fall. I'm talking about Japanese beetles in particular. Are you guys familiar with them? They can devastate an apple tree in minutes. Uh, they're found in a wide variety of flowers. Goldenrod, there's is a native plant that's a fabulous plant, and there are several native varieties. There's also hybridized varieties that are a lot showier, and they still have great nectar. So, uh, goldenrod in the fall is a special plant. All spireas. Are you guys familiar with spireas at all? They're blooming right now, and the butterflies love them. The hummingbirds like them. They only bloom for a couple of weeks at a time, but they're nice shrubs, foundation shrubs in your yard. Yarrow is not one of my favorites just because a lot of times it looks kind of crummy, but a lot of people like yarrow. Sunflower and then winter sweet. So bats are prolific nighttime pollinators. Bats are having their own troubles too. There's a disease, white nose disease, that's going around with the bats. And I know we live close to the river. It used to be when we first moved there at night, we'd just see hundreds of them swooping low over the water, picking up the insects. And now you might see one or two in the evening. It's a sad thing. I haven't heard the latest on it, if they're able to stop it or there's just nothing they can do about it. But we are losing pollinators. So anyhow, the list goes on. Ants, that's a wasp up there on top. Not my favorite little creature, but they actually pollinate because they get that pollen on their wings and on their legs and they go from flower to flower and it gets transferred. The moths are great. And actually so are the flies. Flies do their own job. Wasps are drawn oftentimes to meat-eating plants. I mean, not meat-eating plants, but they're meat eaters. They like to chomp on stuff. I think oftentimes they're drawn to plants that have a lot of aphids on them because they're after the critters that are on the flowers. And I've seen them eat ants, chomp down. Unfortunately, they also will eat honeybees. But they're after the critters that are on the plants. And so my guess would be anything that has a lot of nectar draws aphids, right? Does everybody know what an aphid is? I'm just kind of making that assumption. So they're really not after their nectar. They're a little cannibal, but they're there because something else is there. Um, So the issues facing pollinators are pretty significant. And when I was doing the research, I know this, and sometimes I hear so much of it because I do follow it that I get a little bit disheartened. And it's hard to absorb it all right now. But think about what's going on in our world. We have a huge climate crisis, pretty serious. The temperature is going up, but what's significant about our temperatures that are going up is our nighttime temperatures are changing. That's the issue. Not only is it hard on people, it's hard on our critters, on our insects, on our pollinators. 2023 was the hottest year on record for us. And on the right, this is us. You can't blame it on anything else. Declining natural forage. Look what's happening when you look at the right-hand slide there. That's that's I'm sure there's a couple trees in there somewhere, right? But that's a desert. That's a desert to animals, and our land is being eaten up, acre by acre by acre by acre. So, it's pretty hard to undo that once that happens, and we can see it everywhere we look, right? I will say this, that I hope at some point that we wise up and become more like Europe. I don't know if you all follow what Europe is doing, but they're leading on this edge. When they have a farmer anymore, they have laws that every farm yard has to have a boundary around it that is set up with wildflowers and not just natives, but plants for the bees, for the hummingbirds, for the pollinators. And if that every so many acres is required to have it, if it doesn't, then they have to bank it and put it somewhere else. It's a requirement. It isn't just the farmers, though. It's all of us. It's landowners that need to be considerate of what they're doing. And I grew up on a farm down in Iowa, and back then everybody had fence lines, right? Fence lines filled with solidago and native bee balm and all sorts of things that's where everything lived. The pheasants lived there, the bees lived there, the birds, ate the insects from that area. And what's happening right now is all those fence lines are being pulled out. And that's kind of a huge issue. It seems small, but it's big. Um, Overuse of pesticides and herbicides. This is huge. And it isn't one, it's an overuse by all of us in our home yard. We tend not to read the labels and follow them carefully. So we think, I had an aunt that used to make pudding and it called for so much cold milk. She'd put cream in because it was 10 times better, right? It was good. But the point is, insecticide doesn't work that way. We really need to follow the label guidelines. We need to use it as it's required, and we need to be very conscious about even using it. Do we really need to use it? Are there alternatives? And there are a lot of natural alternatives out there for gardeners. Ladybugs, for example, could be used to control an aphid problem. Um, what I can say about pesticide and herbicides in particular, there's a lot of studying being done right now in honeybees because we're losing them. We're losing them. It's a huge fight. And just from my perspective, several years ago, everybody thought herbicides were okay. Doesn't matter, spray your yard, herbicides don't hurt bees. Well, now we know it doesn't kill them outright. What it does is they land on those wet plants, they take those herbicides back to the nest, and it kills the larva. So the hive declines, but it's a slow decline. It's not overnight. And it's just an uphill battle. Um, and if it's happening with honeybees, I can guarantee you it's happening with many other pollinators. I'm going to talk a little bit about neonicotinoids, and I get going on some of these things. I'll try not to. Who's heard the term neonicotinoid? Oh, most of you have. Okay, so I'm preaching to the choir probably, but neonicotinoid is something I can remember about 20 years ago came out with Bayer. I had a lot of roses at the time, and they had a fertilizer and a long-term insecticide in one that I used for my roses, and you know what? It worked great. I didn't realize it had neonicotinoids in it. I didn't know that was a bad thing at the time. But that's what's happened is Bayer and Shell and I think actually other companies too developed these neonicotinoids, which is a form of nicotine. It's a chemical that has structured from nicotine. And I went into a lot of detail because it's hard to stop up there, but you can read it for yourself. We'll try not to repeat it exactly. The problem with neonicotinoids is they're invasive. They are systemic. So when they get into the soil, when they get into the plant itself, they stay there many times for years and years and years. Neonicotinoids have been banned a lot for home use. You can still get them, but a lot of those are gone by the wayside, but they're heavily, heavily used in our crops. They're often the cover. The seeds are covered nowadays. The seeds that are planted uh, for our commercial growers. So whether it's soybeans or corn or whatever, they're covered in neonicotinoids, which are supposed to be a stable, which is not because they form a dust and that dust is released. So not only does it get onto our beans and our corn where the farmers want them, and I'm not just picking on farmers, but I am a little bit. What that dust does is it covers everything else. It covers any natives, any fence rows, anything that's there, and it stays there for years and years. And what happens is the plant brings those neonicotinoids up and it retains it. Maybe let's say we've got a little plant, a little flower out there, and it's holding a little bit of water. You know how they do. And the insect lands on that water and drinks from that water, and it is killed because the water contains neonicotinoids. Or they chew on a leaf of, um, you know, a lamb's quarter, something like that. That's we'd consider a weed that's growing on the side, and they're killed because it has neonicotinoids in it from the overdust that has been sprayed by those. Not sprayed, but that has come from the seeds. They have been banned in Europe. There is a movement to ban them here, but it's an uphill battle because the companies that make these are huge. They have a lot of money, um, a lot of power, and it's kind of hard to get past that. So, what I can say for us is be aware of this stuff. Just be aware of it, follow it, and one voice. It's amazing what one voice, when you put them all together, can do. So, a number of years ago, I used to buy a lot of plants. I buy plants everywhere, but I used to buy a lot of plants from Home Depot. And I had read an article how Home Depot refused to stop buying plants these are bedding plants that had been treated with neonicotinoids. And I emailed them a letter and never heard back from them. But I did read, somewhere later on that thousands of people did that. And guess what? The next thing I knew, they have announced they're trying to stay away from neonicotinoids. So that's what we all have to do. And doing a little bit of research, I see now that Lowe's is they're not there yet, but they want to be 100% neonicotinoid free from their plants, is what I'm talking about. Home Depot is going in the same way. Walmart is already there. So your voice might be one of thousands, but it makes a difference. It really does. Um, anyhow, neonicotinoids are pretty bad little thing. You can avoid them by what we've already talked about. So you can avoid the neonicotinoids about buying where you know it's safe. Um, I belong to a garden club in Hudson, and years ago I heard that Fleet Farm was the best place to buy, not, one of the best places to buy your plants because they were nicotinoid free. The greenhouses that supply them. So when I went to Home Depot, I asked, "Are these nicotinoid free?" Well, I have no idea. Well, I didn't buy plants from them. So do your research. I would bet that a lot of the smaller growers have done their research and they're probably safe to buy from. Um, so many trees and shrubs, instead of being pollinator driven, requiring pollinators, their pollen is disseminated by the wind. And if that's the case, if they've been treated with neonicotinoids, they're less harmful, right? Um, of course, we spend a lot of time worrying about our basswoods along the river. We have a lot of our honey comes from those basswoods, who, by the way, all the nectar is being washed out right now from what they're blooming right now, and all the nectar is being lost. But you can't help it, right? But the basswoods, which are lindens, and the maples are pollinated, so you want to keep that in mind. Um, I don't think it's as big of a deal anymore with your perennials, and annuals are not such a big deal, but I would sure be careful where you buy. Buy from a reputable dealer if you can. And if you're not sure if they have nicotinoids, they should have it on their site. And if they don't, shame on them, right? Um, okay, we'll go ahead. Okay. So, how do you attract the pollinators? It's not all doom and gloom. It's just like writing one email to a company and you think nothing happens. I think it makes a big difference when we buy in groups, how we spend our money and how we use our voice. I really do. So, talk about this, spread this, talk to your grandkids about pollinators and how important they are. So when they grow up, they understand that diversity is important, that these pollinators are important. So when we talk about specific plants, one of the things I see home gardeners do a lot is you plant one or two plants of something that has a pretty flower on it because it attracted you when you went to the garden center, right? And I'm guilty of this too. But pollinators, especially honeybees and other things, they really prefer patches of things. They will stay with one plant until the nectar is gone, unless they have a favorite one that starts to bloom and they'll hop over to that. Um, so plant in patches. Think of planting in waves. That's a new movement in landscape architecture, which really follows kind of an old movement, right? So think of planting in waves. So instead of planting one, plant six, plant 12. Then you'll have something eventually, if it needs to be divided, you can hand out to a neighbor or a friend, but plant in groups. Um, So we'll go on. The other thing is plant permanent gardens. Annuals are just fine. I think they add a lot of color, they add a lot of spice. But think of permanent beds, and this is kind of where natives are great because natives allow you to create a permanent bed, but so do other perennials. And the reason you want to create permanent beds is one, well, not the most important reason, but it does save on labor. But you leave the soil undisturbed. The soil, you want to create habitat for your pollinators. The soil provides home and nesting sites and cover for all your pollinators, especially just think of the bird life that you can have. So, create permanent beds and um, try and leave that soil undisturbed. When you're planting a bed, one of the ways to think about it is plant it in layers. Have you guys heard of that's kind of a new movement, but it's an old thing. Somebody's written a book called The Layering Garden or something like that. Do you understand what I'm talking about when I say to plant in layers? The real gardeners, or I shouldn't say that, but a lot of gardeners understand that term. I was going to say old, and that puts me in that category, so I'm not going to say that. Plant in layers. So let's say that you have something 2 or 3 feet tall towards the back of your permanent bed. Put something that's only 18 inches in front of that. And here's the secret: use a ground cover. That ground cover, and there's millions of them, that ground cover is going to hug the ground. It's going to keep you from disturbing the soil. You don't need to mulch it with wood or gravel because there's something already there. Plus, you don't have to pull weeds. If you pack your garden tightly rather than a specimen here, a specimen here, a specimen here, there is less work. So that's the thing to do. And there's a million ground covers, soil, shade, whatever you want. Try not to use insecticides. We talked about that in detail, I guess. So we're talking about really protecting the soil health. You can also use mulch for weed control. And, the mulch doesn't have to be that really expensive brown or black mulch that you buy in bags. I mean, yes, it looks great. However, you can use ground cover. You can save the clippings to your grass. That works great as a mulch. If you're near a farm, you can use hay that's not any good or straw that's not any good, and that will keep the weeds from coming up. If you've got an area that you're working on, and let's say it's full of invasives, right? If it's buckthorn, you're going to have to pull the buckthorn first. But let's say it's an invasive, something that's going to give you blisters, if you walk through it. So you're going to get it out of there. Give the natives the chance to grow, or the things that you've planted a chance to grow. And you can do that by getting rid of that particular invasive plant and mulching. So use grass clippings. They work great. They're cheap, right? They work great. Or I have goats. So, what I have a lot of hay and straw, stuff like that. Um, and the other thing pollinators love is a source of water, meaning a constant source of water. Constant source. Moving water is great if you can do it, but a bird bath is just fine. You just need to keep it clean. Mhm. Yeah. So we talked about creating a diverse garden. That's an example of a layered garden. Now that's got some fancy stuff in it. It's got boxwood in the front, but behind it are hydrangeas and some Russian sage and some really wonderful things. Here's an example of layering your garden. This is Pachysandra. Pachysandra is a specific ground cover that loves the shade, and it will get this thick. If you give it a little bit of decent soil and shade, there you go. So the weeds just can't come up through that, or if they do, they're one and few. You can get rid of them quickly. Planting in large groupings. On your left, is an example of native grasses that have been planted in large groupings. And I will say that I think they're more effective when you have the room to have groupings of them. When you just have one plant, it looks like you're trying too hard. It doesn't look natural. So work it in groupings. Um, in the middle, we have oh, yeah, that's Joe Pyeweed. Yeah. So that's a great native. Monarchs like the Joe Pyeweed. That's a tall one. I think there's several varieties out there, aren't they? But the Joe Pyeweed, the standard one is what, 6 feet tall? 6 feet tall? It, it's pretty tall. There's a sawtooth one that's out there that's a little bit shorter, but they need room. That's a little bit more of a wild setting. You're seeing your native grasses in the background. On the right-hand side of that slide, you're also seeing natives come up because what's happened to that particular garden, it looks to me like they've gotten rid of the invasives. Once you get rid of the invasive, it allows the natural things to come up. And buckthorn's a stinker because it puts something in the soil that prevents other plants from coming up. Yeah. So you really want to try and get rid of your invasives. That's another example of layering. See how you have that understory? So you have an understory tree. There's probably taller trees than that, but that's an understory. Then you've got your mid-level plants, and then your ground cover is growing right there. So simple water feature could be as fancy as you want it to be, but it doesn't have to be costly, right? You do want to keep it clean because it'll also be a haven for mosquitoes unless you keep it clean. There's all kinds of fun stuff to do. Here are just a few of my favorites, and I'll just run through them really quickly. But if you have any questions, let me know and we can talk about other specific plants. Ageratum is an annual. Are you all familiar with the ageratums? There's short ones, there's native ageratums actually, and then there's taller ones that are more like a foot to 18 inches tall. Here's what I've learned about watching my bees, and you can learn the same thing from watching pollinators in your garden. We have in this area dearths of nectar, meaning we go through periods of time, especially kind of early fall, where nothing's blooming. Nothing is blooming. I mean, before the goldenrod starts, there is nothing blooming, right? And our annuals can be the savior to our pollinators. Ageratum has a white it has a white pollen, and during that dearth period of time, my bees are gathering white pollen and they love the blue flowers and they are on they love them. They're all over the ageratum, so are the moths. And that's a dearth that we had. That simple annual plant is huge in your garden. A linden, of course, we sell, our bees create a lot of basswood honey. Normally, without all the rain, we have good basswood flows, but a basswood is also called a linden tree. And there's many varieties of linden trees. So here's an example of a tree that feeds, acres and acres of pollinators. American cranberry bush viburnum, there's two different sizes. There's a dwarf and a standard. They're viburnum, and any viburnum is a fabulous plant. Any viburnum is they do take up some room, but I would check them out because they're gorgeous. This particular one has the beautiful white flowers in the spring. They've already bloomed. Then they turn to the red berries the birds love. And then the American cranberry bush goes scarlet and orange in the fall. It's stunning. And it's easily trimmable if you want to do that. Purple coneflower is a native, but there's many, many hybridized ones. And I don't think it makes a lot of difference what you use as long as it has that open petal formation. Autumn brilliant serviceberry. You guys familiar with serviceberry? Again, great flowers, early spring. One of the earliest to bloom. Great berries for your bird friends and great fall color. It's a mid-story tree, gets probably, I would say 10 to 15 feet tall. Can handle a little bit of shade. Doesn't have to be in full sun. Anise hyssop, I grow as an annual. I believe there's a native that came from a native variety. Oh, 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 everybody loves it. Everybody loves that. And that's another example we should talk about briefly. I don't want to take too much time, but many of these flowers you don't want to cut in the fall. Leave them, let them overwinter. And from a design perspective, they add huge interest to your landscape. That anise hyssop looks like nothing right now, but in the fall, it's got these brown spikes. So you look at that in over the top of the snow and you think, oh, that's gorgeous. It's just structure is striking, and it's a very simple plant. Black-eyed Susans, my grandmother loved them. Who doesn't like them, right? They're easy to grow, full sun. That's just a few. And yep. Leaf Farm Garden Center. Wow. Goodbye. Yep. Goodbye. I've bought quite a few from there. Yeah. 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 Um, so originally I was going to give you print offs, and then talking with Kim, I realized nobody does print offs anymore, right? Why waste the paper? Everything you need is online. And you're always welcome to email me or call me if you have any specific questions. But there's great, great, great resources online for anything you want. And you could take a picture of this if you want to so that you have it. But what I need to say here, try to be clearly, is support your native plants. They are important that we use them, but they are not the only tool, right? You can mix them and use them with different things. Do I have any questions, I guess? Yeah.
Thank you for your
Yeah.
earlier you talked about the color of coneflowers and other plants. From my understanding, like sometimes when scientists bioengineer different plants so they have different color production, they lose the attraction to certain pollinators and they lose the ability to pollinate like your originals, correct?
Sometimes, but not all the times. For example, in my garden, I have beautiful red coneflowers. I like that brilliant red, right? Everybody loves them. They love them. You got to remember that certain pollinators have favorite colors. So if you're trying to attract something in particular, maybe you go for its favorite color. Um, I think it's interesting when I watch my bees, here's what I see them do. So the first thing to bloom in the spring is usually dandelions. Well, actually, before the dandelions are scilla. Are you guys familiar with scilla? Little blue bulbs. Very that and snowdrops. Very first thing out in the spring. Oh my gosh, the bees are so excited and they're all over them, right? Then the dandelions come. Yeah, they could care about the scilla. They're on the dandelions. Then the minute the white clover starts, they could care about the dandelions or on the white clover. Just like us, they have their favorites, right? And I don't know why, what it is. One nectar tastes different than the other, and some seasons are different than the others, but they have their favorites. And I'm watching the bees because they're my buds, right? But it's the same for other pollinators. Yeah. Any other questions at all? Um, We do. Yeah, we run about 50 hives and we also buy honey in our apiary. We sell honey, you know. Bees are the most interesting creature. They're just honeybees. All bees are good. Native bees are good too, right? But we're losing our native bees twice as fast as we're losing our honeybees. And I guess I didn't talk about what's happening with our pollinators. Honeybee loss now is um, an average for commercial honeybee keepers is around 30%. Hobbyists are up to about 80%. That's nationwide. You tell me any other livestock that you lose those kind of percentages in and you can stay in business. It's tough. It's really tough. And honeybees in particular, it's because of a lack of forage. It's just a storm. It's a lack of forage. It's neonicotinoids, which are pesticides. And then they have a mite that would be like a tick to you and I, but it's mites that attack the honeybees. And the mites themselves don't kill them, but they suck on them and they vector disease. Yeah. Did I have a question there? No. Okay. Okay. They vector disease. So, years and years ago, you'd buy a hive, you'd put it out in your field, you'd take some honey from it, you'd check on it now and then. It overwintered, or you might split it and have two hives. That doesn't happen very easily anymore. So most queens will only survive about a year with honeybees right now. Yeah. They came over, they think, on a cargo ship. Uh, and I can't tell you exactly when, but I would think now it's around 25 or so years ago. And I mean, there's all kinds of research being done on them, trying to raise mite resistant bees. It's pretty hard to do. It's just pretty hard to do because you have other factors. There's so many of them. Yeah. Yeah.
This is kind of a rabbit hole question, but we just got a bird bath from a neighbor who was moving out. And it was so full of red algae, it was almost like it was full of tomato juice.
Ugh. Yeah.
So the question is, do you have any tips for keeping bird baths clear of red algae?
That's a good question. Um, I don't know right offhand. If it were mine, I can tell you what I would do, but I don't know that you want to, might want to do your own research. I would probably scrub it with bleach. And I think that I would put a tiny bit of bleach water, keep bleach in the water a tiny bit. I don't think it'll hurt your pollinators or your birds, and I think it'll slow down the algae. That's probably what I would do. Yeah. Mhm. Mhm. There you go. There you go to get it off. To Mhm. 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 Mhm.
said he really likes that it's a long period of pollen, and other people got all excited. Oh, that's invasive, it's horrible. So what do you feel?
Bird's foot trefoil was planted intentionally by our highway department to hold the soils along the roads. As a landscape architect, when I was in school, I was taught to use European buckthorn because it makes beautiful hedges and it cuts easily. So we've had all sorts of stuff happen like that, right? I I don't think I think it's a good pollinator plant. I don't know. I don't have a lot of issues with it. I don't see it killing trees. Yeah, it is holding soil, right? Um, it's not my favorite plant, but over time we've uh, as a group we've taken actually natives and declared them obnoxious weeds and eradicated them and really hurt our forage for bees. We've done a lot of that, and it always hasn't been a good step to take. So I just tread carefully on all of that stuff, you know. Did that answer your question? Yeah.
Watching at a later date, a recorded version. Could you describe where honeybees would live naturally if they're not living in a hive?
We find very few honeybees naturally anymore in the US. Remember that honeybees are actually a European, came from Europe. But obviously, they've adjusted very well to the US, and we would not be able to have the crops that we have without them. But the natural habitat for a honeybee would be like a hollow tree or a big tree with a hollow limb. So they like natural cavities that provide insulation for them that allow, because honeybees are the only bee that store honey. The store honey. Other bees, native bees, create honey only seasonally, but they don't store it. So honeybees want they're actually picky about the size of the circumference on the inside of these logs that you would naturally find them, or you can find them inside the walls of an old house or old barn, right? They're there for a reason. It works for them. And when our hives that we use today, they're called Langstroth hives. That's the name of the fellow that made them back in the 1800s. The proportions of the inside of that hive is very precise. It has bee space in it. So we have to find the natural trees and things like that. When you have a lack of forage, you have less spaces. What I'm reading right now is they're finding fewer and fewer natural hives. Our bees are carrying these mites, whether they're in my hive box or they're in a tree, they will not survive without our help at this point. So, will we get past that? We might. I know so many people are working very diligently on it, but we haven't got there yet. Yeah.
Like to native bees?
I've heard that. Um, I haven't heard that the mite problems are moving to native bees. What I've heard is that some of the diseases vectored by the mites are moving to the native bees. I don't think it's a huge issue yet. Um, it's just one of those things you can't stop. To get rid of the honeybees because they might transfer a disease to native bees? I don't know that you can, right? We have goats, and this year we had a huge outbreak of the chicken, what was that called? Bird flu, right? We small flocks. Don't let your chickens out. This bird flu is rampant. Then we had 2 cases in Minnesota where bird flu was transferred to goats because they had the chickens in with the goats, which I think is really a cute idea. Well, we're not going to do it. So it was transferred. So, I mean, unfortunately, that happens quite often, right? Yeah. Mhm.
Do you feel like how much space is adequate before you would feel like you need to add a water feature or bird bath or something? How many years do they need the water?
I would say immediately. They need it right there. They really need it right there. If you want to see them, put water right there. I mean, like right there, right? We're on the water. We don't have a water feature because we're 15 feet off the river. So it's right there. But water features anymore can be so simple. And you can even buy tiny little heaters to put in there for the winter and keep that water open, which is huge. I'd highly recommend it. They're not expensive like they used to be, you know? Yeah. Ooh. So the comment was, well, you can buy solar powered pumps nowadays. It's a great idea. It's a great idea. Yeah, we have so much at our fingertips anymore, don't we? Yeah, we really do. And that seems like a small thing, but it's not. Your garden can be a wayland for these pollinators. It can be a stopover. You can have it be a resting place for the pollinators. It can be a haven for the pollinators and the birds and all wildlife. And why not do everything that we can do, right? If you mulch, if you use ground cover, you don't have to spend your life pulling weeds, right? Yeah.
One thing to kind of be aware of about common milkweed is one year I bought 3 plants from Burton's. I had it, I put them in with my flower beds.
Mhm. Right, right.
Took off seed pods, so but underneath,
Mhm.
you go up like Freedom Park, you'll see this whole community.
Yeah, yeah.
I would put it away from our garden,
Yeah.
because it becomes a small community, but also there's parts of that milkweed too that people can eat as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I people sad. So when you're teaching kids about things like that, just kind of putting in details that,
Mm-hmm.
young nettles and
Right. Are edible. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm.
that there's a lot of benefit to that.
Right. So I'm going to say this for the camera audience, but so the comment really was that milkweed can be invasive. So the thought is maybe to kind of isolate it, if I'm saying that correctly, into kind of its own area so that it can grow that culture, that grouping. And there's also edible parts of the milkweed that we should learn more about and share. I will tell you this little interesting tidbit because we're so concerned about the monarchs, people forget about what happened 50 years ago or 100 years ago. Milkweed was almost eradicated. And do you know why? All the farmers would pull it in their fields. If I have I have goats, I pull my milkweed. And the reason I do it's highly toxic to goats. I could lose a goat. If that little stinker would get out and munch on a milkweed, I could lose them. It's highly toxic to cattle. And so farmers would pull it all the time, right? I think people forget those lessons, right? Now, I'm not saying it's a bad plant, but there is an alter ego kind of to it. Yeah, yeah.
We're eating your basil. Bring some coffee grounds on the basil. Seems to be safe at the moment.
Really, coffee grounds to protect your basil. Yeah, yeah. Planting herbs is a great thing. Basil is one of honeybees' favorite blooming plants. And moths like it. They're drawn, think about the color of it, the bloom, but they're just drawn to it like crazy. So you just got to kind of remember when you're planting plants for pollinators, they need the bloom. They need the bloom. A simple thing you can do in your garden or in your yard for pollinators, if you do nothing else, is overseed your lawn with white Dutch clover. years ago when we would buy grass seed for our lawns, it was all laced with white Dutch clover. And somewhere along the road, we decided that we needed to come in and spray pesticides and herbicides and all sorts of stuff, that if we had a plantain, oh my gosh, or a dandelion, it ruined our yard. Well, the best thing you can do, one of the easiest things, is let your lawn go wild. Overseed that Dutch clover. Bees and everybody loves it. Yeah. Do they? Yeah.
The grass or the lawn would be like 12, 18 inches.
Yeah. Yeah.
Natural.
Yeah.
They don't, we actually kind of looks for them in their lawns.
Right.
They just, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah, they did. And we must have. I don't know what happened to us, but there are long-term preferences like the sparkling emerald lawn that are not good. So here we are to change the ideas of what's beautiful, right? We can do it. Yeah.
The monarch the last few years, and the rose milkweed or swamp milkweed, they actually seem to prefer as far as the caterpillars go. I get a lot more caterpillars on it than the common milkweed. Now I go out and look at it all the time, and then I usually collect the caterpillar, which is about yay big, and I'll bring it in and let it do its thing like a little plastic kind of my little method that I do just to save them, because it seems like once they set up half the time they get attached by other things. And
Yeah. Yeah.
don't spread. We the underground runners on the common milkweed makes colonies, and then runners, but the swamp milkweed just comes up where it comes up.
Right. Plus, it has a beautiful bloom. Yeah. Yeah. It's taller. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And other plants to make it, be pain in the ass that way, because I know that people, before you know it, the milkweed is like running and
Yeah. 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 So go ahead.
That there are things that take that.
Yeah.
And ruin it. And so if you can move that inside a netting or whatever, and kind of help it that way, I think you have much better success.
With the monarch, with the cocoons. Yeah. 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 So I want to repeat this comment for our at-home audience that swamp milkweed actually produce more caterpillars, monarch caterpillars, right? They're less invasive, they're taller, but they have beautiful flowers. So good tip. Yeah. And if you can remove the caterpillar on the monarch, if you can move that, what do you want to call it again? The cocoon to safety, then you might be able to save the guy, huh?
Doing a lot of changing a lot of stuff. There's people that do hundreds of them,
Right.
like eggs, and they collect them at all different sizes. My lazy way is I usually get them maybe about 3 or 4 days before they're going to do their cocoon, and then I put them in. I use a little plastic cup with holes at the top. And I have a few milkweed leaves in there. They eat that for a little while, and before you know it, they spin around, and then they hang off that lid. Then I wait till they open up. About 10 days later, and then I let it out. Fly away.
Cool. Monarch Nursery, right?
Big.
Yeah. Well, we probably should wrap it up. I want to thank everybody for coming tonight. Are there any last questions at all? Yeah, Sean. I'm sorry. Sean, would you like to say a few words? Yeah.
Sean, why don't you say it?
I just wanted to say real quick, thank everyone for coming tonight, and thanks everyone for coming tonight. And if anyone's interested in volunteering on being the River Falls Bee City Committee, we'd appreciate the help. Thank you. Thanks, Melanie.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate you coming. I wasn't sure anybody'd be here tonight, but I'm glad you love pollinators.